It is titled Barriers in Housing Security in Wisconsin, From Applications to Evictions. We know that this topic is exceptionally important. Barriers to secure housing start with getting into a home and continue throughout tenancy. In some of the worst case scenarios, already unstable housing can end in eviction. And our panelists come from Fair Housing, Tenant Resource Center, Urban Triage, and Legal Action, and will share today about what they're seeing in their work as barriers to securing and keeping housing in Wisconsin today. Thank y'all so much for being here with us. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. My name is Chris Belliantimo. I am with the Tenant Resource Center. And how does our organization address the issues of housing security? We have different programs within our organization, which is housing counseling, the EDDP, Eviction, Diversion, and Defense Partnership. We have partnerships with other attorney organizations, one of which is with us today. And we're able to help those who have eviction court date navigate the court system, as well as understand their rights and responsibilities. And this also includes services with rental assistance and some light touch of housing navigations. We do a lot of housing counseling, and that is part of the Know Your Rights.
Yes, thank you. My name is Erin Kautz. I am a staff attorney at Legal Action of Wisconsin. We are part of the EDDP partnership, as Chris Belli mentioned. So we work with tenants that are referred to us by the Tenant Resource Center to represent them at their eviction return dates or in eviction trials. And we also do get some more upstream referrals where we are able to help folks before they are court involved. So if they've received a notice and they're not sure what to do, or if there are a lot of problems at their apartment complex, those are issues that we can provide some advice or potentially some representation to those clients as well. So my work is primarily in housing, but Legal Action as a firm serves all of the 39 southern counties of Wisconsin in a variety of different areas. So we offer free legal assistance to low-income folks in housing, but also in barriers to employment, reentry after incarceration, family law issues, supporting victims' rights in criminal cases, and also public benefits work as well.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I am the Outreach and Education Program Manager with the Metro Milwaukee Fair Housing Council. The Fair Housing Council is a statewide civil rights enforcement agency. So our work really revolves around combating discriminatory practices in housing to make sure that everyone in our community can choose where they live, and to help build communities that are more diverse, both racially and economically. What fair housing actually means is essentially there's a set of laws that give each and every one of us the right to be treated fairly and equally in our housing. So that means if someone denies you housing or treats you differently than someone else, say because of your race or disability or sexual orientation or age, or because you have children in the home and so forth, any other protected class, then that's actually a violation of your rights. So we work to help ensure that those rights are being protected. We primarily do that through enforcement and education and outreach. So in our enforcement program, people who have experienced discrimination in housing can reach out to us for assistance. We can do things like conduct an investigation to gather evidence and assist someone in filing a fair housing complaint so that they can pursue their legal remedies. Under the education and outreach side, which is the side of our work that I oversee, it's really just about getting out into the community and raising awareness of fair housing. So we do things like conducting presentations and distributing educational materials and a variety of other activities to make sure that both housing consumers know their rights, and also housing providers and people that work in the industry understand the laws that they have to follow.
Hi, my name is Katrina. I am the homeless outreach lead for Urban Triage. And what we do at Urban Triage, what we are doing is we assist people and we support them with housing, employment, and being an advocate. Right now, we do have our programs that are called the Quick Move-In Funds, because we do understand that a barrier for people is the funding for moving in, and that's where we're providing. We also provide the resource, and we do heavy case management, which is helping them search for the apartments. Some people aren't able to do that themselves, and they need, that assistance. So that's what we are doing at Urban Triage, yes.
Thank you, Katrina. So housing security begins with the ability to secure tenancy in the first place. From upfront costs to screening applications, what are you seeing right now as barriers to securing housing for potential tenants? And I leave the floor open for anyone who wants to go ahead and answer. If not, I can chime in too.
I can start. I think one of the biggest barriers right now that exists to accessing housing is simply the affordability of that housing. We have a real lack of affordable housing, particularly in Dane County and the Madison area. And we are just starting to increase that housing stock and try to bring those rents back into something that people can afford. But one thing that I think is really rewarding about my work is when I am able to assist folks to get into a subsidized housing unit or maintain their housing choice voucher. Having that subsidy and knowing that your rent will always be affordable to you is really invaluable.
I agree with you on that. I definitely agree. We get clients that come in, and the barriers are, the application fees. Sometimes they're $100, $150 and, they might not be able to, afford that. As well with the price of housing, it being so expensive right now, and they can't afford that. We also get people that come in and they have Section 8 vouchers, but they don't count that as income. And so they're having to provide, they have to provide income, but they don't count the Section 8, so that's always a barrier, and then they end up losing their voucher because they have so many days to get a unit or get an apartment or a townhome or whatever it is, before they can lose their voucher. So yes, I agree with you on that. The income is definitely a barrier.
Yeah, I will just chime in on, because I know several panelists have already mentioned the use of housing choice vouchers, otherwise known as Section 8, to pay for housing. Unfortunately, rent assistance is only protected in 3 jurisdictions in Wisconsin, and that's Madison, Dane County, and Milwaukee County. So that means everywhere else in Wisconsin, it's not prohibited to turn someone away because they're using a voucher to pay for housing. Even in the areas where it is protected, it's not always well enforced. Madison, unfortunately, has a really great local enforcement mechanism, but that's not always the case. We don't see that in Milwaukee County, for example, that those local protections are being enforced. So you essentially have folks who have the ability to pay for housing, who otherwise meet all of the criteria, but are being turned down simply because the housing provider will not accept a voucher or other type of rent assistance, which is really unfortunate. Obviously, it disproportionately impacts several protected classes: people of color, people with disabilities, families with children, etc. I just wanted to add a couple of things, barriers that we're seeing that, again, because we focus exclusively rather on protected classes. So some of the things that are a little bit unique and things that we're seeing more recently are barriers for refugees and barriers for transgender individuals. So for refugees, the barrier that they often face is that they don't meet the traditional tenant screening criteria, right? If you think about when you apply for housing, they're going to require proof of income, and they're going to look at your rental history and credit history. Well, if someone is brand new to this country, they're not going to have established any of those things yet, right? And so they're essentially being denied purely for administrative barriers. And in spite of the fact that, and I think it's important to note this, in most cases, refugees are receiving some kind of assistance to help pay for rent. Also, in order to enter this country as a refugee, you have to undergo extensive screening via the federal government, right? So again, these are folks who have the ability to pay for rent, who have been screened, who are just being denied housing because they don't check the right boxes. So it's really important for housing providers to think about being flexible with their screening criteria. How can we accept alternative documents and not always just the traditional documents as a way to enable refugees to have better access to housing? And then I also mentioned transgender individuals facing housing barriers. What we're hearing is that a lot of times individuals are being subjected to really unnecessary and in some cases illegal questioning or scrutiny around their gender. So particularly if their gender or their name doesn't match what's on their ID, they're being asked personal invasive questions, which is not only inappropriate, but in some cases may be illegal and a violation of their rights.
Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. I would like to add a little bit of what I have seen. I think it has a lot to do with what community you're also serving, right? We see a lot of different scenarios at the Tenant Resource Center. One of the biggest ones that we've seen recently is newcomers, and whether it's legal or not legal status, it's the whole, I don't have the income to get an application fee, and I don't have $2,000 just laying around to give you for a security deposit, and then another $1,000 for rent. And then since I have no credit, I don't have the extra $1,000 for the last month's rent. And it's the reality we're living in right now, and it's really harmful for, I mean, not just the families, but the community as a whole, you know? I believe that with the core, and when COVID began, there was core funding, so it's federal funding that came through, and we were able to assist people with rental assistance, and I believe Urban Triage was part of that as well, and CAC, and a lot of money was distributed during that time, and there's never enough, you know? It's heartbreaking to see. I work closely with the eviction filings, and I see those court dockets on a daily basis. Today is Tuesday, so court is happening, or was happening as your previous panel was speaking. And in an hour and a half, again, it will go back up Tuesdays from 8:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. and then 8:30 to 11:30 a.m. and then 1:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. on Tuesdays, and Wednesdays they're 1:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. on a weekly basis, and trials every other day. So being firsthand, seeing these situations, seeing these families coming into our office and asking for assistance, whether it's rental assistance, whether it's attorney assistance, Legal Action PLC and others, CJI and the UW Defense, it's heartbreaking. Because you start seeing a pattern. You start seeing a family come in last December, and then when I look at the docket, I'm like, wait, they were just facing eviction like 3 months ago, and here we are again. Where are we failing? You know, like there has to be something going on. So seeing all that, and also getting the word out for people to understand that housing is a basic human needs. You know, it's so basic that if you have somewhere to go home to after a long, stressful day at work, or just work in general is hard, you know, no matter what industry you're in. So being able to go home, relax, have some family time, or just you time, depending on your family, right, feels comfortable. It feels good. You know, you can just go and relax. But not having that alters your mental state, your kids having to move schools every 6 months for whatever reason. COVID hit. We all know that everything got inflation. Everything got expensive. Like you go to the store and it's $50 for like 2 things. And if it's like, it's insane. And you're telling me that my application fee is now $500 and my rent is $2,000 for a 1-bedroom? Those are the barriers. And the Latino community, for what I'm seeing, is facing a lot of issues with documentation, paying with money orders, and then the money being lost. Or there's just no record of that. But then again, since usually it's legal status situation, I'm not gonna go and say nothing to my landlord because this is my only housing I was able to get. So therefore, I'm gonna sit here, look pretty, and if I have to pay them again, I will pay them again, because I don't have the documentation they're asking of me to go and live in somewhere that's gonna give me a little bit more for what I'm paying. To that, does anyone have anything else to add?
Yeah, just briefly to go back to these exorbitant application fees. A lot of these folks that have a lot of other barriers beyond affordability, be it they're part of a protected class that faces discrimination in their applications, maybe they don't have the best credit history, or they have an eviction on their record, they know that they're facing barriers, and they know that they have an uphill battle to securing that new housing. And so it's gotten to a point where people have to be really particular about the applications that they are filling out and the timing of when they're doing that to give themselves the best chance to get housing at the lowest input of funds for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on what you were talking about as far as fear of retaliation. I think that's a major issue for a lot of folks, not only, as you mentioned, if someone is undocumented, but also just because of the housing shortage, because there's so little housing available and the housing that is available is so expensive, there's this fear that what if I lose my housing and then have to find a new place? And so that makes people less likely to come forward and report issues, whether it's an issue with like a repair or housing condition, or whether they're facing discrimination. They're less likely to want to report that because they're afraid that could end up in an eviction or a lease non-renewal.
Yep, that is right. So I would also like to ask, I don't know, Erin, if you would like to answer this question for me. Can you provide a brief overview of the eviction process?
Yes, so one of the barriers that I mentioned briefly in applications is having an eviction on your record. So the eviction process is what we call in the law a summary process, meaning that it is basically a fast-tracked process that deals with who is entitled to the possession of the property. And just with the way that the law is structured, there is a strong presumption that the landlord does have the ultimate possession of the property if they followed all of the correct steps, then they are able to get that possession. So the eviction process starts with providing some sort of notice to a tenant, but even that's not always necessary. If you have a term lease and the term of your lease ends, you don't need to have a notice for your landlord to say, well, you're here past your lease, I'm going to file an eviction. Once that eviction is filed, you'll get that first initial return date. In Dane County, those are still via Zoom, but in other surrounding counties, they are back to being in person. And at that return date hearing, there'll be a determination if there is a actual contest, and if there is some sort of contest that the court recognizes, then it will get set for a trial. And that entire process can take less than 30 days to go from start to finish, to a writ being issued and executed to forcibly remove someone from their home.
Thank you, Erin, for explaining that little brief process of an eviction. It sounds brief, right? But the mental capacity you need to be able to go through that as a family member, you know, like if you have children and then you have to go to work and then you have to come home to a home that potentially might not be yours anymore. It's scary. So just knowing that you have somewhere to go to get that rental assistance if you need it. You know, Tenant Resource Center is highly available there if you're eligible for assistance. And we do have an eviction courtroom available for those who have technical difficulties or just simply don't have the technology to go through Zoom and appear, because not appearing is probably one of the most hard things to do. If you don't appear, you get a
Default judgment.
yes, and that is, as we stated earlier, that is one of the biggest barriers for housing. I'm sure that my friend here, Katrina, I'm sorry, can talk to us a little bit about the resources that Urban Triage is able to offer to tenants, for example, after a default judgment is granted.
Yes, so the process that we do with our clients, when we get clients that has an eviction and they did not, show up to court, we are supporting them, but we're also using, I want to say sorry. So our process when we're working with people that have an eviction on their background is we're trying to get it redacted. We're assisting them with, some people might not be able to have the transportation to get to court. And we provide that. The caseworkers do, which is me. I'm also a caseworker. So I do provide that, making sure that they're making it to their court date, or providing the resources and speaking on their behalf to try to get it redacted. We're also utilizing our resources where we work with people that are private landlords, because sometimes that can be a longer process, trying to get it redacted. So while we're doing that, we're also working with them using the people that we have relationships with, that are private landlords, trying to get them into something still. So that's kind of what we're doing when we get clients that come in with that.
Thank you. I have another question here. How does the process lead to long-term housing insecurities? I know that you work with a lot of tenants. You assist with representing them at court and after. I know you guys do a lot of follow-up with tenants as well. I don't know, Erin, if you can talk a little bit about maybe writing letters to landlords with an attorney representation?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Katrina was saying with how Urban Triage is able to support their clients as well. Sometimes you just have that eviction and it's going to stay on your record. And if there's a judgment that's been entered, that can stay on your record for 20 years. So you just kind of might have to be in a position where you have to just address that that's on your record. And one of the ways that you can do that, if you were just on your own and not getting support from another agency, is to submit those letters. We can sometimes provide letters to tenants that explain sort of the situation of the judgment and why a landlord should not hold that against the applicant.
Thank you. I would like to add a couple of notes there. So usually if a tenant comes to the Tenant Resource Center and they have either a judgment or a stipulated dismissal in their CCAP, because that's where most landlords look for information in regards to housing, we always suggest that tenants write letters to their landlords informing them of such thing before a landlord goes and digs out the information, right? And I'm saying that because as a human being, I'm sure we all understand we prefer to know the information beforehand than start digging in and start noticing. Like, oh, well, you lied. I didn't lie. I was just not going to share that, right? But as a tenant, I believe it's a great idea to be forward about what you have on the CCAP, and understanding that we're all human. We all make mistakes and things happen, right? COVID was one of the biggest things that I was able to see that really hit, and it hit hard. People were not able to pay rent, and it's not that they weren't working, it's not that they were bad people, it's not that, there's so much to it. Mental health, everything just came down. Like, I believe COVID tested us humans pretty good. So being considerate and thinking about that, like, people were above water doing what they could and still are. We're still dealing with a lot of the end of COVID, I would say. So just being very upfront with the landlords, explaining I'm not working this way anymore. I plan to, I have this plan in action so that this doesn't happen again, right? Or I have this case manager or this social worker that can vouch for me. Co-signers are also an option. And just getting things in writing. One time somebody asked me, does writing letters really help? I said, not with everybody, right? I mean, how harmful can it be to write a letter to a landlord letting them know, this was my past, this is me now, please give me an opportunity because we all deserve a second chance, right? That's a lot of what we do at the Tenant Resource Center. And like Erin was talking about, the EDDP team as well. We're able to assist tenants if they're eligible with a security deposit and first month's rent. The only downside about this is that they are needing to be court involved, so they have to have been court involved within the last 6 months. And again, being court involved is one of the biggest barriers, so we want to stay away from that. But unfortunately, that is what the funding we have is for. And just wanted to clarify as well, Tenant Resource Center unfortunately can only serve people in Dane County, as well as the funding is for people in Dane County. But of course, and the legal process that we learn as well is from Dane County, but I'm sure Erin has some more detailed about that, maybe, about other counties.
Dane County was able to really set up a great program to work with the federal funding that was received from the American Rescue Plan Act, and we were able to create this amazing partnership where we are able to bring those services to the folks that need it. But outside of Dane County, it's much more rural, and a lot of the rental funding that they received is already spent. There aren't limits on it anymore because there's no money to be had. And we are one of the few low-cost or free legal options for tenants, and the need is definitely there, and we would love to be able to reach everyone, but that's part of our outreach, is being able to get information to more people so that they feel comfortable representing themselves and advocating for themselves when we just don't have the capacity to be able to represent everyone.
Thank you, Erin. Does anyone have anything else to add?
I could just chime in a little bit on the topic of eviction. So the Fair Housing Council, because we're a civil rights agency, we're typically not involved directly with the eviction process. Normally, if someone comes to us and they're facing an eviction, we would refer them out to one of these other great resources. Would be a great example of the kinds of referrals that we would provide, especially to make sure that they had legal representation. But there are some situations where an eviction and a fair housing violation could be intersecting or happening simultaneously, right? So for example, let's say a family receives an eviction notice and there's whatever the stated reason is, but they believe that the actual reason for the eviction is that the landlord doesn't want families with kids living there, and they're just trying to get all the families with kids out of the building. So they're basically alleging that discrimination is the reason for the eviction. In that kind of situation, it is possible there are some mechanisms in place where perhaps there could be a pause or a halt on the eviction process while the discrimination complaint gets resolved. I will say that that's rare. That doesn't happen frequently, but that is a possible option. In another kind of scenario, you could have a situation where, let's say there's a tenant who hasn't paid rent in several months, and so they receive a notice that they're being evicted due to non-payment of rent. But while they were living in the property, they were being charged a monthly fee for their assistance animal, which would be a violation of their fair housing rights. So you have two things happening simultaneously, right? The eviction might be legitimate due to non-payment of rent, but they were also experiencing discrimination. So in that kind of situation, it may be a case where the eviction process plays out and, you know, whatever happens, perhaps they get evicted, but they do have the option then to retroactively still file a fair housing complaint to pursue, potentially pursue damages for the fees that they were being charged and for the discrimination that they experienced during tenancy. I realize none of those are really fantastic options, but there are options, and it can get really muddy. Unfortunately, the fair housing complaint process and the legal process where evictions are handled are two entirely separate arms of the law that don't talk to each other. So unfortunately, that means for a tenant, that means pursuing both things separately and simultaneously, because they're not considered typically as part of the same process, for lack of a better way of explaining it.
Thank you for bringing that up. That is a very important topic to touch too, though. I know this isn't part of our conversation, but I have been in touch with Tenant where they did have a fair housing complaint in process, and they were able to halt their eviction because of that. And that is very true. We see a lot of retaliation in that sense, but it's more so if a tenant doesn't know their tenant rights, it's a lot harder to catch it. But I could also share that some landlords don't know what the law says either. So it gets really hard, and that's why helping landlords know their landlord responsibilities and rights is also one of the biggest important things, and assisting the fair housing trainings that I know that you guys have going on. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think just keeping an eye out, learning more about what is out there, that 704 chapter is really important as a tenant and a landlord. So thank you. I would also like to ask whoever wants to take a first grab at it, what do renters need to know about their rights in the renting process? Don't all go at once. And where can they find resources? So 2 questions there. Got that hamster running.
So from a fair housing perspective, I would say the biggest thing for tenants really is that discrimination, especially in this day and age, is often very subtle and very sophisticated, and therefore very difficult to detect. So it's important to kind of be aware of the possible red flags. So for example, if you see an ad that an apartment is available and you go in and you inquire and they say, oh, sorry, it was just rented, but then you continue to see it be advertised. Or if it says one thing in the ad, but then when you get there in person, they tell you something completely different. So, you know, maybe the cost is different or the availability is different than what the ad said. So if you feel like something is off, if you feel like you're not being given accurate information, that's often a good sign that perhaps something discriminatory is occurring. Also, just if you think about the protected classes, you know, race, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, etc., for the most part, these are not even things that should be part of the conversation when you're applying for housing, right? For the most part, your protected class should not even come up, should not be discussed, should not be asked about, should not be part of the process of deciding whether or not you're able to obtain housing. So that in and of itself would be a red flag as well. We are a resource, the Fair Housing Center, the Fair Housing Council is a resource that people can turn to if they just have questions about their rights, or of course if they feel like they've experienced discrimination.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
How would you suggest tenants or people who are looking for a unit keep track of these red flags?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because in order to be successful with a fair housing complaint, you need more than just your word against someone else's, right? You need some sort of proof or evidence. And so it's really important for tenants to keep records and to document everything, right? So if you have voicemails or texts or emails between you and your housing provider, you want to save those. If you can capture things on your phone, like take photos or videos of things. If you go in to look at an apartment and you're handed an application or a business card, all of those things are really important to kind of keep track of to potentially help support you if you would have to allege that discrimination occurred.
Thank you. Now that you're saying all this, I'm thinking about like senior housing. That wouldn't include that, correct? Because it's specifically for people who are older than 55? Or what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so there, it's called HOPA, which is Housing for Older Persons. So under the law, there are designated 55 plus or 62 plus housing units or housing complexes, which means they may have some ability to restrict people based on age. They cannot restrict based on any other protected class. And it's important to understand that in order to do that, you really do have to, there's like a lot of regulations you have to follow. You cannot just arbitrarily become a 55 plus or 62 plus property. So there's a lot of regulations that come with that. And there are situations where you may have children living in those properties because it's not always 100% of the units or 100% of the residents. Sometimes it's just a percentage. So if you see a senior living community and you see children there are situations where that can happen. So it's not necessarily 100% of the residents are 55 or 62 plus. So,
Thank you. I'll repeat the question one more time to see if Katrina or Aaron have anything to add. I don't want to be the only one talking. So what do renters need to know about their rights in the renting process, and where can they find resources?
Something that I share with my clients about the renting process, a lot of time they come in because they're applying on their own, and they say that, oh, I keep getting denied, and they're saying like, well, they didn't tell me why I was denied, or they won't tell me why. And I always try to remind them and let them know you have a right to know why you were denied for the apartment. They can give you a written letter, saying why you were denied, and then we can move forward from there, to get around that barrier. So they do have a right to know why they were denied for an apartment, instead of, you're constantly applying for all these different places, and then you don't know what the cause of it is, if it's because of your credit or, something on your background, or maybe something you're not aware of. So it's always good to ask for a denial letter. Yes.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Getting a denial letter is really important. There are also some affordable housing, like low-income housing tax credit properties, where they have additional regulations or agreements in place that don't allow them to consider certain things, or they have to have some sort of grievance process. So yes, getting all the documentation, like both Sarah and Katrina have said, is always so important. And I know that's a lot of work and it's a huge burden, but it really does help you to enforce your rights as a tenant or an applicant.
I love all this. Thank you. I love working along with you guys, and it's great. I think now my turn to answer the question. So what do they need to know? What do renters need to know throughout the process of renting is, as Sarah said, document. From the start of search to the end of your lease, and continuance after. And that goes to security deposit purposes as well. So my biggest top thing is document everything. So once you get into the unit, you take pictures, videos of absolutely every single corner in that unit, return that check-in sheet within that 7-day period, take pictures and videos of everything that's going on, repairs. And if there is a repair, as minimal as it is, report that so it can get repaired. Even if it's your fault, it should be repaired. That does mean, though, that the landlord can make you pay any costs that were incurred due to that repair issue. But throughout the tenancy as well, continue to document all these repair requests. I know that a lot of newer or a lot of companies are doing that online software requests for repairs and payment portals. If you do have that, I think it's always a great idea to screenshot the repair request, because sometimes you will not have access to it anymore if you're going through an eviction process. So I think that part, documenting pictures, videos, following up, and then using all the resources you have. And one of the biggest resource that I can say, I mean, come on, right? Tenant Resource Center. We are there to assist both tenant and landlords with their rights and responsibilities. And it's really important for you guys to understand that we can't advocate for neither party because we are a neutral party. So we're here to give you the resources you need for you to go and make the educated decision for yourself and or your family. I can't make a decision for you because what's okay for me or what's going to work for me will not work for you. We have different lifestyles, different families, and I'm not going to be held responsible for making a decision that I shouldn't have. And that's one of the biggest things that we at the TRC are proud of, continuing that straight line. And we're not attorneys, which is why we partner with them, because we can't tell you what the law says. We can tell you what the law says. We just can't tell you how to do it. And I think that's an important skill for people to understand, you know, knowing what to do, knowing where to go, what resources you have available, and then go do what's best for you. And like we said we're all available. We all have different locations, and Legal Action is there, Sarah's there, Urban Triage. So we're all here ready to assist with what we can. And if we can't do it, I'm sure Sarah can help you. And if Sarah can't do it, she'll take you right back and do a soft transfer to Urban Triage, where I think that's what the community is here for. And that's what today is about, to continue helping our community, continue caring for each other, continue the growth, and just know that that's what we are, the community, right?
Right, yes, I want to echo that, that we are trying to break down all those silos and really get all of the different providers on a common page so that we are able to make those referrals to the correct organization if there is someone that would be more appropriate to help them. So if you contact one resource, they might be able to direct you to another. The county has some great resources too available. Joining Forces for Families is a great resource throughout Dane County. The ADRC, Aging and Disability Resource Center. Those are two examples of some county ones that would also be able to connect you with other smaller nonprofits as well.
The only one I would add to the list too is because we are statewide, so we receive calls from all over the state, and when people are outside of the Milwaukee or Madison area, the resources become fewer and fewer. So one of the statewide resources that we refer people to is the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. They have a landlord-tenant division where people can just call and ask questions about their landlord-tenant rights. And I believe there's a way to pursue complaints through that department as well. So that's a good statewide resource. We do a lot of referrals around landlord-tenant issues because we handle fair housing issues, not landlord-tenant issues. So,
yeah, thanks for bringing up DATCAP, short for Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protections. They have an online website. You can do their complaints online and add in any information you have. So letters, emails, texts, pictures, videos. It is important for people to understand that once you submit that complaint, that same complaint you submitted will be shared with your landlord, so they will be aware, and then there will be some mediation going on between tenant, landlord, and DATCAP. But I highly encourage for people to use those resources, as well as like the building inspector, whether it's in Madison, Sun Prairie, wherever you're living, there's always somebody that can come out to your unit and make sure that those repairs are being done. Anything else anyone would like to add? Okay. I think we're done. Yeah. Thank you so much.